What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the latest edition of the Hub of Champions podcast with your host, Shukri Wright. If you're a Celtics fan, it's a great time to be a Celtics fan. Congratulations. You have made it through paradise so far. Now awaits the real test of the second half of the season post All-Star break. And here with me tonight is a gentleman whose work I respect, I admire. He covers the Celtics for WEEI. You can check out his work at weei.com. That is the one and only Justin Turpin, who joins the pod this evening. Justin, how you doing? How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk some Celtics, talk some hoops. It's been a weird couple days with the All-Star break, but I'm excited to get back to it.
Listen, weird probably doesn't even begin to adequately describe it. I mean, that's probably being a little too modest. It's been lackluster. It's been disappointing. It's been a lot of words that I think would be truly befitting to use. But I think the biggest one of all is that it has been rather disturbing. I'm going to use disturbing. And some people are going to wonder, like, why? Why has it been disturbing? Because you see, the All-Star break is designed to give players a break from those who are not playing in the All-Star game. However, if you are playing in the All-Star game, it is not a break. It is a game. You're expected to perform. You're expected to perform at a high level. And something that the NBA All-Star game lacked was competition, was competitive nature. We witnessed a game that nearly totaled 400 points, 397 points to be exact. It was a game that featured both Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So, of course, there's always the local flavor involved in there. But the problem I have is that NBA All-Star game has lost its lackluster. It's lost its magic. It's, everything. It's just lost its touch. Justin, after watching what we watched on Sunday, how do you feel about the NBA All-Star game? Because I'm at a point where something major has to change. And I'm sorry, money should not be the motivating factor for guys wanting to play and compete at a high level in the NBA All-Star game.
Well, that's the thing, and that's the problem. So the winning team already does get paid, but it's really not
True.
much compared because it's only 100,000, which to us is a lot, but to those guys, not quite as much. But
Yeah.
there's just, I don't think there's any way to actually get them to take it seriously because they're looking at it as a break as well. It's kind of an
Yeah.
honor thing, and I don't think that's just enough to sell them to go hard and play. I mean, that game was
Hmm.
serious for about a minute and a half, and you see it even with the dunk contest. Like
Yeah.
you don't see superstars anymore. That's why it was such a big deal that Jaylen Brown was in it. And it's just kind of, it's a long season. You play 82 games. I mean,
Yeah.
we've already played a bunch now. I mean, there's just, you're getting ready for the second half of the season and you're just kind of, you want to take time and you want to take advantage of that, but you also don't want to turn down the opportunity to represent your team, represent yourself. I mean, it's an unbelievable honor to be an all-star. And I think
Yeah.
one that most players strive to achieve. And I think being there is an honor, and that's something they don't want to turn down because if you're like, oh, I turned down All-Star break, it kind of makes you look bad. So they're not going to
Yeah.
turn it down. I just don't think there's any way to fix it. Like even look at the NFL, like Pro Bowl, like it was never really competitive. Hell, it's flag football now. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's an honor thing, and I just don't think there's truly any way to fix it.
I think part of me feels and believes that if you're gonna fix it, um, and I'm mad at the fact that I actually agree with you. I'm not mad at you, but I just feel that this generation of players are just wired differently. This isn't like back 8 years ago, 2016, like when we witnessed Kobe versus LeBron and that epic matchup in that game. This isn't to 2001 NBA All Star game, like where I remember it was AI, AI and the Dikembe Mutombo and Ray Allen and like Shaquille O'Neal. Like I mean, it was just a different generation, different breed of legends who are all mentioned all now in the Hall of Fame. And I just get the sense that, yeah, it's a break, but I feel like there's got to be something because anything, I thought that the body language of Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, was particularly telling during the presentation. he tried to hide it, but it's like you could tell like he was disgusted, he was annoyed. Justin, like, would you agree with that? And I just feel that those things are 100% warranted because that was a topic of discussion on Monday morning.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think anyone that watched that game, and there was a lot of people that did it did some great ratings. I don't think anyone that watched that game would tell you that that was a good product because it wasn't. And if they tell you that, they're lying. It was simply not a good product. I mean, sure, it's fun to see these superstars just jack up shots. And I mean, I always love watching NBA players shoot. I think it's one of the coolest things. But you know, there's only so much that can entertain you. And when you're watching a game, it's like that was a minute and a half in, you have a 3/4 court shot. It's like that's not entertaining, right? And I just don't think it was a good product. So I don't blame the commissioner for being upset. And you kind of look at like what he's done, and like with the in-season tournament was a hit. Like you see, even the last couple All-Star games when they kind of modified it seemed to be a little bit more of a hit. And like I think even those past All-Star games, like that format might have been a little bit more competitive and a little bit more, you know, entertaining. And I just don't think this was a good product. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that would say it was a good product.
And I agree with you. I don't think there's anybody out there that would even say that. I think even some of the biggest names in entertainment I have been critical of the NBA All-Star game, especially the way that it was played on Sunday night. Now, bringing it back to the Celtics, because this is a really interesting time outside of the fact that this has been the best team in the NBA this season so far up until this point. But it's been an interesting time for the Celtics as it pertains to both Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, we saw that he finally got the bring strap backed up last summer. He signed down that massive extension. Jayson Tatum has been playing pretty much like at an MVP level. I would even go as far to say that he does have a legitimate case to be an MVP this season, given the unfortunate injury to Joel Embiid, who, if he wasn't injured, I would say actually Joel Embiid should be the NBA MVP. But the fact that he's gone for the remainder of the regular season, I think the nod right now should go to Jayson Tatum. And the comments the other day, in fact, just within the last 24 hours, where Jayson Tatum basically said that he feels that he is the best player in the NBA. That caught my attention. Like, oh, really? I'm not questioning that Jayson Tatum is not one of the best players in the NBA. That's not what got my attention. You feel that you are the best player in the NBA. I could sit here and nitpick to start off with this particular topic, but I'm not going to. But Justin, when you hear Tatum say that he is the best player in the NBA right now, try to be as objective as you can. Do you agree that Jayson Tatum is the best player in the NBA? Because I can name at least two that I would put ahead of Jayson Tatum in this particular discussion.
I just can't, you know, it's hard to crown him that when he hasn't won, right? I think that's kind of a deciding factor. And that's something like, and I think Tatum even admitted it, that like he needs to win to be in that conversation. Someone that has won is Nikola Jokic. Steph Curry's won. LeBron James has won. I mean, there's still those kind of older guys, and use that lightly. Like there's guys like Curry and LeBron that are still in the league. So, you know, Jayson Tatum can't ascend to the best player just yet, but I think he certainly can be. And people forget how young he is. Like he is so young. He's only like, it seems like he's been in the league for a while because it's been 6.5 years, but he came in, he was 20 years old. He just turned 20 when he dunked on LeBron James in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, like the dude has his signature moments. 51 against Philadelphia in Game 7 last year. Game 6 against the Milwaukee before in the finals run. Game 6 forced the Game 7. I think like he has his signature moments. He has the accolades. I think like there's no doubt he's among the top, but until he wins, I just don't know if you can put him in there. And he accepts that. And he even said in that interview that he wants to be a winner. That's how he wants to be remembered. And I truly believe that. And I think a lot of people get on him for being selfish, but that's just not the case. I think he is one of the most selfless superstars in the NBA. I think that the whole Celtics roster has done a great job with that because there's a lot of talent on that team. It's not necessarily easy to take less shots, especially considering the league is just so married to the box score metrics. And now
Yes.
it's not easy to get away from that. So I think
Mhm.
like the Celtics in general have done a great job with that, and Tatum's behind that. So long-winded way of saying I think Tatum's in that conversation, but just not quite yet. He still needs to win one.
You know what's interesting? What you just said about the NBA being so married to the box sheet metrics. I couldn't agree more, because the way I feel that NBA stars are being evaluated today, they are being measured by how many points are they averaging, how many rebounds, depending on like what position they play. And I mean, even regardless of the position, points, rebounds, assists, and so forth. In the last 3 years, we've seen the big man win the MVP. And I'm talking about Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets, and last season, and deservedly so, Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, you look at Tatum, and you make such a poignant point about him being one of the most selfless superstars in the NBA. I agree, where he's not selfish with the basketball. And I think almost to a fault. Because part of the problem that I have with Tatum saying what he said, it's not because he's confident. I don't mind that at all. But rather, if you are going to be, or you're going to proclaim to be the best player in the NBA, you gotta have your moments where you say, you know what, it's time for me to take over. Not saying that he doesn't have this moment, because you alluded to it. He did have the 51-point performance in Game 7 at home against the Sixers in round 2 of the playoffs last spring. But you haven't seen that enough. And in a year where the Celtics, the expectation, I mean, which is pretty much widely known, banner 18 or bust, we need to see more of that. I think ultimately what we're going to need to see more of from him is take over the game. Yes, you got a perfect sidekick in Jaylen Brown. I get that. But if Jayson Tatum is going to be, and as you mentioned, if he's going to be looked upon as the best player, at least one of the upper echelon players in the NBA, you got to have those ones where you take over. You started with Steph Curry 2 years ago in the NBA Finals against the Celtics. You started with LeBron in his career, especially when he's in Miami. You saw that. I'm going yesteryear now. I saw that with Kobe. I saw that with Shaq. I saw that with some of the legends in the game. I just haven't seen that with Tatum. Is that fair in your opinion?
I think it is. I think he does get too much kind of slack for like not having that. A lot of people say he doesn't have that quote killer instinct. A lot of people
Yeah,
say
I've
that,
heard
but I
that
think he
before.
does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like one of
Yeah.
people's biggest criticisms. Like when you look at the biggest criticism of Jayson Tatum, it's that he doesn't have that killer instinct and that he's not a
Mm-hmm.
leader, which I don't think both are necessarily true. Like I don't think they're true. I think thing is with Tatum is like you said, he just needs to find a way to really just take over the game. And he's shown he's beyond capable of doing so. But
Yeah.
sometimes he doesn't necessarily do it, right? He'll try to involve his teammates a little more than maybe he should. And I think it's easy to kind of blame him for that. But when you look at the teammates he has around, like especially this season, like you
Yeah.
have a top 6, all of which, well, 5 of which have been all-stars. Derek White should have been an all-star. So
I
you're
agree.
looking at that. It's like they are just so talented where it's easier said than done for him to just kind of pick a spot to take over. And he's shown he can do it. It's just a matter of doing it consistently.
Interestingly enough, you mentioned about the talent on this team. And I was talking about it with Tony Maserati of 98.5 The Sports Hub on the previous episode, which the listener and viewer can go ahead and listen to as well. That was just posted on Wednesday morning, in which that this is the most talented team in the Tatum Brown era. I strongly believe that, and I don't think it could be argued. You go back and you look at going back to 2017-18, all of those teams since that season up until now, I don't think any of them has had the talent, and dare I say the depth, that this current Celtics team currently has, including the fact that they have the best defensive backcourt in the NBA, which says something, because they didn't have that 2 years ago. When you look at what Jrue Holliday has been able to do this season after he was acquired via the trade, alongside with Derek White, who I wasn't sure what to really expect from him, given that this was the first year that he was going to get a significant increase in minutes. But he has really blossomed And that trade that the Celtics made with the Spurs a couple of years ago, acquiring Derek White, continues to look better and better with each and every passing game. So, Justin, with the way that this team is currently constructed, do you believe that this season, with the talent that they have and with the reinforcements that they just acquired, including getting Xavier Tillman just recently, is it better 18 or bust?
I think for sure. I know Wyc Grousbeck's not necessarily looking at that way, and rightfully so. He said back in October that it was kind of more of a 6-year window, which makes sense because anytime Tatum and Brown are on your team, you're a contender for the championship. You've already seen that. Tatum's been in the league for 6 years. He's been to the Eastern Conference Finals 4 of them. So anytime you have them on your roster, you're a championship contender. However, the talent they have now is going to be tough to keep because once those second apron those punishments kick in, those penalties, things are going to be a lot harder to keep this team together. This is the best shot they've had, especially look at the East. I mean, they have a 6-game lead in the Eastern Conference. Like, that's unheard of this early in the season. I mean, obviously it's not necessarily early, but like considering they have a 6-game lead in the Eastern Conference, that's impressive. And that's kind of unheard of. So I think it has to be banner 18 or bust. I mean, what they did, they were saying that, like, you go out and spend all that money, like they went all in. And Wyc Grousbeck said it. He's like, we're going to go for banner 18 or we're going to die trying. And that's exactly what they've done. And I think, I just don't know how you can watch this team and be like, wow, they like Jrue Holliday and Kristaps Porziņģis, they are the missing piece. Like, it tells it. Like, that is the missing piece. Like, the way that Kristaps Porziņģis like opens up their offense, Jrue Holliday and Jaylen Brown doing a great job kind of quarterbacking that defense. It's just every move they made this offseason had just been an absolute hit, a grand slam. And Brad Stevens deserves some major credit for that.
Absolutely. And I think that when you look at the way that this roster was constructed for this current team, I want to address something here in 2 parts. First and foremost, looking at the moves that they made last offseason. They go out and they get a Kristaps Porziņģis. They go out and they get Jrue Holliday. They move on from Marcus Smart, which I said at the time last summer, this was the right move to make. Because if you are going to take that next step, and this is no disrespect to Marcus Smart, but if you're going to take that next step, you have to move on from Marcus Smart, whom in more ways than one I thought was kind of holding back Tatum and Brown in terms of their development as leaders on this team. Because let's be real, the de facto captain on this team was Marcus Smart. He had been there the longest since the 2014 NBA draft. But now what you're seeing this season is that they both have grown as leaders, but then also looking around at as I was going back to the moves that they made getting Porziņģis and Jrue Holliday. I think that the biggest move between the two, if I had to pick between which move was more impactful, Kristaps Porziņģis or Jrue Holliday, I would say probably Jrue Holliday.
Really?
Would you agree or disagree?
I would disagree. I honestly, like, and that's no knock on Jrue Holliday. Jrue Holliday has been terrific in his role. But what Kristaps Porziņģis brings to this offense, he's completely opened up a new game for Jaylen Brown.
Yeah.
Like, we're seeing Jaylen Brown's playmaking in ways we haven't seen it. Like, he looks like a different player. He's playing some of the best basketball of his career, and that's a lot of credit to Kristaps Porziņģis because he opens things up so much for the Celtics. His ability to screen, his ability to space the floor, punish mismatches, work in the post. I mean, he just completely changes their offense. And the post game has been a big go-to for the Celtics when the threes aren't falling. And that's a big credit to Kristaps Porziņģis. I think I always go back to the Detroit game when they were at home. They trailed by double digits to Detroit. How'd they get back in that game? Third quarter, just dump it to Porziņģis right in the middle. He went over it. Nobody has an answer for him. Miami Heat, they swept that season series. Why? Because they had no answers for Kristaps Porziņģis. The Miami Heat have thrown zone at the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. Celtics haven't been able to break it. So what Brad Stevens do? He goes out and gets one of the best zone busters in the league in Kristaps Porziņģis, who can score from anywhere. And like I alluded to, punish those mismatches. So I think it's just like what he opens on the offensive side is just so important to the Celtics. Because I thought their defense was already good. And even last year, I thought their defense was underrated. think a lot of people harped on the offense, but their defense was good. But like even on the defensive side, I mean, he provides elite rim protection. He's got 74 blocks. Like that's nothing to scoff at. And he fits in the Celtics drop coverage scheme. And I just think that has been the perfect marriage for both sides. I think Kristaps is playing some of the best basketball he's played because he's not necessarily a 1 or a 2 anymore. You know, he's able to kind of take that back seat. But I mean, that's no knock on Jrue Holliday, because the Celtics aren't where they are without Jrue Holliday, right? It's both of those additions were key, but I would lean the Kristaps one was more the game changer.
I've noticed that with Kristaps Porziņģis, and you mentioned that it's definitely opened things up for Jaylen Brown, where he's playing some of the best basketball of his career. I noticed that the Celtics have looked different offensively, where it's like they'll toy around, and they've done this with some of the opponents, some of the lesser opponents, where they'll toy around and they're like, you know what, let's just stop messing around. We're just gonna blow the doors off the hinges. They did that against the Brooklyn Nets. That 50-point blowout win was like, oh wow, okay. Forgive me for blasting this team for playing down to this opponents. But my goodness, but no, like one thing that stood out to me in terms of Porziņģis is that like when I think back and just within the last 2-3 years, they haven't have a player that could post up, that can dominate the paint, and that has a lethal mid-range game. And then, oh, by the way, they can shoot threes too, like a Porziņģis.
Step back. I mean, this is no step back threes at 7-2.
Step back threes, exactly.
That's insane.
It really is insane. Like this is no knock on Al Horford, by the way. But I was worried going into before the season started. I said, if they don't get someone that can either complement Al Horford or someone that can be a better player than Al Horford, I think there's a weakness there that other teams in the East can potentially exploit. And so far with Porziņģis, I don't see a team that's been able to really exploit any real weakness that the Celtics may have on the floor. When I look at the Knicks, do they pose a challenge to some extent, but not really. When I look at Cleveland, do they pose a threat? Not really, not so much. But when I also even look at Milwaukee, with the exception of the one game that they got completely blown out in Milwaukee, they haven't really posed much of a threat at all. So I'll ask you this, Justin, like, do you see a team with the way that the Celtics have been dominant offensively, and gotta give them some love, like defensively, but do you see a team in the East has been able to be a suitable challenge for the Celtics in the East?
I haven't. And I think, like, I like how you alluded to that Milwaukee game. I think that was a scheduled loss. I mean, look at how many times they played in that week, a back-to-back. I mean, it sounds like a cheap cop-out, but when you look at the circumstances of that game, it was definitely a scheduled loss, and they didn't panic about it. Like, I don't think you can count out Milwaukee because there are some talent there. And I honestly, like, when you look at the playoffs, like, does Doc Rivers really scare you? And Doc Rivers is a major reason that we have that championship banner, that 2008 one, but does he really scare you in the playoffs? I don't know. Cleveland's really good defensively, but I just don't think they have enough star power. The one team I look at in the East is the Knicks. I think they got much better at the deadline, and I can't wait for this Saturday for Celtics Knicks. Yeah. This really could be an Eastern Conference preview. That team is good.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Thibodeau's an established coach. I think like people are kind of losing sight. Like after that OG trade, they really took off, and people weren't really talking about it because all eyes are on Milwaukee. Right at the beginning of the year, everyone wrote it off as Boston and Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals. Turning out like Milwaukee's not that good. They're not clicking. And I don't think really anyone saw that coming. Like you get Giannis, an established point guard. Not that Jrue Holliday wasn't, but he brings a whole different presence than Jrue Holliday did, obviously. And nobody really expected this. But New York's a team that people are kind of losing sight on, and maybe because it's like, oh, it's the Knicks. It's all going to fall apart. Which in recent history, it's probably rightful to think that. But like, I don't think people should lose sight of this Knicks team. And this Saturday really could be a Eastern Conference Finals preview.
You know what's funny, Justin? On that point alone, you got me fired up now. I mean, I was ready to fire up before, but now I tweeted this out. Go check my tweets. I'm not BSing anybody when I said it. I said this. I said after they got OJ Anunoby, the Knicks, they were the team that Celtics fans should genuinely worry about. And I strongly believe that. And I'm so glad you brought this about Tom Thibodeau, because even when Tom Thibodeau was with the Bulls, he was always a defensive-minded coach. He's always been able to figure out defensive schemes and how to put certain players in the right positions to create matchup problems on the floor. Look at the Knicks. I mean, say what you will about the Knicks. This is not the Knicks of 20 years between 2000 to 2020. This era of New York Knicks basketball is a different era, whereas I know they have some injury concerns with Julius Randle and whatnot. But what I've seen from what Jalen Brunson's been able to do, what I've seen from what OG has been able to do, what I have seen like overall in terms of just the overall product and how they've been able to operate has been nothing short of amazing to watch. And I think that what you're seeing with the Knicks now and the way that they play defensively, offensively, they're not just a one-man machine with obviously with Brunson, no, but this is a team that could spread the ball all around the floor and make the extra pass and so forth. I just think that this is a Knicks team that could really create problems for the Celtics, especially should they meet in the playoffs, which I think it's a real possibility. If they were to meet, let's say, in the second round or in the Eastern Conference Finals, this could be one hell of a series in which that if you are a Celtics fan, that is a team that you should in fact take very seriously.
100%. And it's funny because the league's trending in an offensive direction. Clearly, look at the All-Star game. There's really teams don't prioritize defense as much, but the good teams do. Like when you look at it, like let's take the Miami Heat, for example. They were 26th in scoring in the regular season last year. How'd they get to the playoffs? They found enough scoring burst and they played good defense. Like look at game 7. Granted, Jayson Tatum was injured on the first possession, but like the way they shut down the Celtics offense, like look at the recent championship teams, right? All of them had good defensive squads because you can't win with the team that doesn't have defense. Like I know, like I said, the NBA is trending towards an offensive direction, but it's not the case. Like defense can't be ignored. That's how the Celtics got to the finals in 2022. That's how they're trying to get back this year. The defense has been the priority. And that's exactly what the Knicks do. They play very good defense and they have the scores. And they only got better at the trade deadline. So that's a team I agree that you really got to look out for because they can play championship caliber basketball. If you have enough scorers and you can play good defense, there you go. And I think a lot of teams really struggle on the defensive side.
And you know what's interesting? I didn't see this at first, but I gotta tell you, in terms for the Knicks perspective of things, because this matchup as you mentioned between the Celtics and Knicks, we gotta talk about it. We gotta talk about it because this, as you mentioned, I think this could be a playoff preview. That's how big of a matchup this is. When was the last time in this generation, and I'm being dead serious now, when was the last time in this generation that you looked at a Celtics versus Knicks matchup and say that could potentially be a playoff preview? Oh, wait.
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. Because like I said earlier, like this, the Knicks have been kind of looked at as a joke.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's the reputation that they've built. And like you said, though, since kind of the turn of the 2020, like going in, like they've been a different team. I think Brunson's really elevated them. Thibodeau's done a great job. Like that's a team to look out for. And they won a playoff series last year.
Yep. And
So
and not some and also a couple players that I want to touch on the Knicks side of things. I definitely want to point out because I do think they could potentially be problem makers for the Celtics. Mitchell Robinson and Josh Hart. I think those two, if they get going, they could create problems for the Celtics not just in terms of like the pick and roll, but especially on the interior. Because I look at Tom Thibodeau as the X factor. The way that I looked at the way I looked at Eric Spoelstra last Eastern Conference Finals as the guy who was going to be a major problem because of his ability to create different schemes, especially defensively against the Celtics, the same way that I'm looking at Tom Thibodeau now. So I'll ask you this. If you had to pick a singular matchup, whether if it's a particular player or a particular style of play that you're looking forward to the most in this particular matchup this weekend, what is it that you are looking out or looking forward to seeing the most?
I'm looking forward to how they defend Jalen Brunson. I think he's one of the best scorers in the league. And the Celtics, for the most part, have done a good job slowing down some of the league's top scorers. Look at like Dallas. Jaylen Brown shut down Luka. I know he finished with a triple-double, had 30 points, but he also took like 30 shots. So you got to look at the efficiency. Like they've done a good job against some of the league's best scorers. So I'm excited to see how they do with Jalen Brunson. And I like how you mentioned Josh Hart because I feel like he really defines.
He flies under the radar.
Like, yeah, he does, right? Because he's not going to put up crazy numbers. I think he's like 7 points, like 7 rebounds. It's nothing crazy. Like he's not going to put up crazy numbers, but he kind of defines Knicks basketball, right? He's going to be pesky. He's going to be tough. He's going to annoy you, and that's what the Knicks do. So I think I'm excited to see. Like this is going to be a good game. I wish Randall was playing. I wish we had a good look at both teams really fully healthy because this is their last matchup. But I'm excited for it, and I'm really looking forward to Jalen Brunson and how they defend him because, like I said, they've done a good job against some of the league's top scorers.
The Celtics, they went out and they made a couple of moves a couple of weeks ago, just before the NBA trading deadline. They went out and they got Jaden Springer and they got Xavier Tillman. And interestingly enough, I brought this up to someone else on a different episode where there was one concern that I did have for the Celtics before they made these moves, and that was with Al Horford getting another year older, a little longer in the tooth. You can't depend on him the way that you did maybe a couple of years ago in terms of giving you quality minutes on the floor and as well as being able to score. You need to be able to get someone that can come off the bench and that can be a dependable big guy. And I think Xavier Tillman, I think that's a sneaky good move for the Celtics on their part. If you have a concern for the Celtics moving forward as they get ready for what we all believe will be a lengthy playoff run for the Celtics, what is your number one concern? Do you think it is like what the bench may look like come the postseason, especially at the center position, or do you think it is something else on this roster?
I don't think it necessarily comes down to the roster. I think it's health. I think that's the only thing that's really everyone's going to keep an eye on. Like the roster is fine. Like they have one of the best rosters in the league, and Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser. I mean, they deserve a lot of credit for the way they've slid in. Peyton Pritchard found his way out of the rotation last year. The guy was demanding a trade at the trade deadline, and they kept him and they gave him that extension, which he told me it didn't really feel like a boost of confidence, but like it looks like it did, right? He came out right away, was ready to go. He kind of had that security with the contract, and I think they deserve a lot of credit. They're not going to go crazy deep in the postseason, right? Because think about it. They already have a top 6. You already have Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard are going to play. So you're really only worried about a third center. And Tillman's played NBA playoff minutes. He's appeared in playoff games. And he's done a pretty good job on the defensive end. I mean, he played really well against Anthony Davis in a playoff series, so against Karl Anthony Towns as well. So I'm not necessarily worried about the makeup of the roster. I think that's fine. Luke Cornett's also proven to be serviceable. Like they have enough, and I think their top 6 alone is enough, especially when you come to the playoffs because it's going to be a shortened rotation. So I think health is the biggest like point of attention for the rest of this second half of the season, specifically Kristaps Porziņģis. That's the guy everyone's worrying about. And I kind of look at it like Rob Gronkowski, right? To kind of compare cross sports. You know what I mean? Like
I know what you mean.
Like every time the guy goes down, it's like, uh-oh. But when he's healthy, he's a game changer, and he's the piece that really elevates you. So that's how I compare him. It's kind of like look at him like Rob Gronkowski. I love that comparison, and that's how I'm looking at it. And as long as he's healthy, then I think the sky's the limit for this team. As long as they, as a team, can stay healthy, and he's obviously the focal point with that.
There was already a moment where I myself included, I was holding my breath. I'm like, dear God, please don't let this be anything serious. When Porziņģis rolled his ankle and was like, okay, there's nothing more than a sprained ankle. He'll be fine. And he turned out he was fine. And you mentioned about health being such an important factor for this team like moving forward, because I strongly believe that if this team stays healthy, there's very little to no reason why they should not be at least playing in the NBA Finals. Even then, that's not enough. They need to win it all for goodness sakes. But in terms of potential X factors for this team, who do you think could be the potential like biggest X factor for the Celtics, especially come the playoff time?
I think my answer is easy, and it's Derek White. I think he kind of flies under the radar a little bit because there's so much talent. But when you look at the clutch this year, he has been incredible. He trails only Steph Curry he's second most in clutch threes, trailing only Steph Curry. He has he has the best plus minus in the league. He shot better than Dame. Like the way he's doing it in the clutch that's kind of an X factor. And it's funny, like people don't give him enough credit for how clutch he is. Like that tip in game 6, like obviously they ended up losing the series. So people kind of lose track of it, right? And when they go back to Miami, people are like, oh, remember Derek White did this thing? And well, they lost game 7. So it doesn't really matter. But like the way he's a clutch player, and I think his two-way impact is just going to go a long way for the Celtics. I mean, he's only getting better, which is the scary thing. Like he's just kind of trending on like a steady pace upward. And I think he is your X factor. And it's kind of a lame answer because obviously he's the starter, but he kind of gets overlooked a little bit because of the talent on this team. And I know he's quickly becoming a fan favorite. Everyone was all in on his all-star campaign, but like what he does might go under the radar a little bit. And I think he is your X factor.
I don't think it's a lame, easy way out to answer. I think, in all honesty, like I think he could potentially be the biggest X factor. I was gonna say like a Porzingis because of his health, not because of his production, but can he stay healthy? Because we know that he has a propensity of not playing more than 65 games in a season. His injury history, unfortunately, speaks for itself. That's my biggest worry. And you mentioned earlier about health being the biggest concern that you have, but for me, like I agree with you. Like I look at Porzingis, I say, can we get through the regular season healthy? Okay, can we get through the postseason healthy? Especially if you're playing in much more like physical matchups like throughout the postseason, that's where I'm like, okay, can you stay healthy, please? Because I like the Rob Gronkowski like comparison, because I was just like, yeah, that kind of is the closest thing that you can think of in terms of like a much valuable player that could potentially stay healthy for a championship caliber team. But as far as the Celtics are concerned, I am looking at the head coach, Joe Mazzulla, as he continues to just get better and better and better. In your view, where has Joe Mazzulla made the biggest improvement as a head coach this season?
His comfortability. I think it's easy. And that was evident from day one. And that it's not even just a media thing. Like he's more comfortable in his own skin. And I think he admitted it last year. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He went from being a second row coach to being a head coach of one of the most prestigious organizations in the league. And not to mention, he was 34 years old. He took over a depleted staff. I mean, it's obviously like it's disappointing. They fall down 0-3, come back, and they lose in game 7. But what he did, the job he did with that team, doesn't get enough credit. Like he took over a depleted staff, lost Damon Stoudemire, who was one of Ime's top guys. It was Joe's top guy. They lost him in March, right before the playoff run. They didn't replace him. So Joe's kind of didn't get to pick his staff, but he got to pick his own staff and did a great job with it, bringing in Sam Cassell, Charles Lee, both of who have won a championship. Sam Cassell is a player. Charles Lee won one with the Bucks and Coach Budenholzer. But like his comfortability, and I think that comes with having an offseason to prepare. He was just thrown in the fire, and I think he's comfortable in relaying his own message and being his own coach. And I think that's gone a long way because he's a damn good coach, and I don't think people give him enough credit because they're how talented they are.
I look at the upcoming matches for the Celtics coming out the All-Star break, and when I tell you, it looks low-key daunting. It looks low-key daunting as hell. They got the matchup on tomorrow against the Bulls, but then after that, the big Saturday night matchup on ABC against the Knicks in New York at MSG. I mean, come on, it's MSG. I'm from New York. I know there's no bigger stage in the world than New York and MSG, for God's sakes. You got the Knicks, you got the Sixers at home, and then you got the Mavericks, and then you got the Warriors, and then you got the Cavs. And then after that, you have the Nuggets. So that's 6 matchups, potential playoff matchups, right after the Bulls. So immediately the Celtics are going to be tested in this stretch. And when you look at the schedule, you're just like, yo, okay. I mean, I know Golden State has had the problems this year, but this is a team that has had your number for a while now. And that's why you don't overlook this matchup, especially at home. It's a Sunday afternoon game on ABC on March 3rd. You don't overlook that matchup at all. But when you look at the 6 games after the one tomorrow against the Bulls, you look at the Knicks, Sixers, Mavericks, Warriors, the Cavaliers, and as well as the Nuggets. How do you see this stretch of basketball going for the Celtics, both in terms of win-loss record, but as well as in terms of just quality of play as being the first big test coming out of the All-Star break?
Yeah, this is a big test, and I'm going to look at more as like a big picture. Last year, the Celtics came out of the trade, the All-Star break. They held the top seed in the East for 4 games after that. Then they were struggling. They lost the top seed, never got it back. Granted, I don't see that happening this year because they're 6 games ahead. Like last year is a lot more competitive. They're 6 games ahead. But I think it's easy to kind of stumble out of the All-Star break. You get a week off, like you're kind of away, you're relaxing. And this is not an easy schedule to come back to. But I think in terms of scheduling, like the Celtics really have had some tough opponents in stretches. Like back in December, they had 1 against the Knicks, 2 against the Cavs, 2 against the Magic. And they swept that series. And all of those teams won the season series against the Celtics last year. A couple weeks later, they head out west. They lose to the Warriors in a game that Tatum had that pull-up 3 that wasn't necessarily great at the end, and he rolled his ankle earlier in that game as well. And then you respond from that loss, just annihilating opponents. You destroy the Kings, you destroy the Lakers, and you run the Clippers out of the gym. Like the way they responded, like they've had some tough stretches already, and I think they've done an unbelievable job at facing those challenges head on and really not dropping too many games in a row. I mean, they haven't lost back-to-back games since the second week of the season. So, I mean, the way they respond and they really do. And this starts with Joe Mazzulla. Like they attack every day. Their goal is to win every single day. And that starts at the top of Mazzulla. So I think this is an important stretch, and it's not going to be easy. I think, tomorrow night against Chicago, I like their chances, but like New York's going to be difficult. Philly without Embiid will be a little interesting. I think it's Dallas, and Golden State's always kind of the measuring stick, right? Because that's the team. It feels like they're the big brother, and they beat you earlier this year. And until the Celtics can really show that they can kind of pull away and beat them, that's how everyone's going to look at it. Even last year, they went into overtime with them when they came. Golden State played here last year. It's just they haven't been able to pull away. And this Golden State team is not, what we've seen in the past. Like, who would have thought Klay Thompson would be coming off the bench? Like, if you can't beat this team, you don't have to blow them out, but you should beat them. You have to beat them because that's your big brother right now.
Like, and as you mentioned, that has been their, I would say, like their Achilles heel, if you will, but it's definitely been like a pain in the ass, if you will, like in terms of teams that they have yet to be able to beat, especially on the national stage, no less. They're on national TV. Like, so interestingly enough, I got to also point this out. After the game against the Bulls, the game against the Knicks is on national TV on ABC. The game against the Sixers is on TNT. Both games are exclusively on ABC and TNT, respectively. The Mavericks game in Dallas, at home against Dallas at TD Garden, that's on ESPN, also locally on NBC Sports Boston. The game against the Warriors, that's on ABC exclusively. And then the game in Cleveland against the Cavaliers is on TNT as well as locally on NBC Sports Boston. And the game against against the Nuggets in Denver, by the way, that's on TNT. And you're just like, okay, they have a lengthy stretch of games that they're getting a lot of national exposure. And for what we've seen this team been able to do this year, I think this is a pretty good test, as you put it, in terms of how good is this team really? Now you have the 6-game stretch where you're getting national exposure. And on top of that, you are going to be tested heavily in terms of what Tatum and Brown are going to be able to do offensively, obviously. But then also defensively, can you handle the likes of a Jalen Brunson and a Josh Hart and a Mitchell Robinson against the Knicks? Can you handle a Tyrese Maxey, who I think is probably the most improved player in the NBA? Yep, and I was saying it before Joel Embiid got injured.
I agree.
Also, and you're going up against as well as Luka, not Luka Doncic. You're going up
They'll
against
see Luka in that stretch.
Luka Doncic and Kyrie. You're going up against obviously the Splash Brothers,
Jokic.
and then in Cleveland, you always it's always a problem going up against Donovan Mitchell. So, in terms of matchups, like how do you see the Celtics navigating through this tough stretch of basketball? Because, and also not to mention you going up against Jokic, who the dude is a problem. The dude is he's a massive problem for everybody, but especially against the Celtics.
Yeah, when you look at it, can you just believe they have a stretch of 9 out of their 10 games over a course of one stretch is nationally televised? Like
I'm stunned. I'm looking at it. That's why I had to talk about. I'm like, what?
Like 9 of 10 are nationally televised. And
by the way, how Justin, real quick, how dare I forget about the matchup against the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah,
KD, and as well as Devin Booker.
I'm excited for that one, especially because that KD matchup always brings out the best in Tatum. So I cannot wait for that one. That's going to be a fun one. And that's at TD Garden, too. That's a 7:30 on a Thursday night. So I'm looking forward to that one. But I just can't believe 9 out of 10 games consecutively are going to be nationally televised. That's insane. And that speaks, that's a privilege and that's an honor for this team. And, they won't look at it like that. But, like, fans should be proud of that. Like, they only put good teams on the national televised scale. So that's good. But, I mean, you look at it, like you mentioned the matchups. One of the best traits the Celtics have is their defensive versatility. And I think that starts with your guy, Jrue Holliday. I think you mentioned earlier about how you thought he might have been the best addition over the offseason. And in this department, he certainly is, because he can guard 1 through 5. Like he is strong. He can guard. He's held his own against Giannis, Embiid. Like you could throw him in different matchups, and that's what the Celtics are going to be doing. And like that stretch of 10 games is going to be interesting to see how many different matchups they go to. Because some days it'll be Jalen guarding a team's best player. Other days it'll be Jrue. Tatum did it against the Thunder when he clamped down on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the fourth quarter. They're all capable of doing it. And that goes back to the defense we were talking about earlier. And the defense might be overlooked a little bit, which is funny because that's how they're hanging their hats this year, right? They want to succeed on the defensive end. But I'm really looking forward to how they handle those matchups and how creative they get. Because Joe Mazzulla, he has some fun with it. Right at the beginning of the season, he had Jrue Holliday covering Julius Randle, like on the first possession of the season. Like you knew right there he was going to have some fun, and he has had some fun with it. So I cannot wait to see what they do. I think that's a fun part of basketball that people might not necessarily pay attention to as much as who's guarding who, because there's 10 people on the court. There's 10 players on the court. Everyone's got their own matchup, and they have to win that own matchup. And I think that kind of gets lost in the sauce of all the threes and the dunks and all that good stuff. But like the matchups are fun to watch, and I'm really excited to see what they do over that 10-game stretch.
I'm excited too, because this is now where you're entering the dog days of the season where, and I say this with all intents and purposes, where it's the last win before the playoffs. The playoffs, they're right around the corner. I mean,
less than 2 months.
Less than 2 months away. And at this point, it's about the seeding for a lot of these teams. And for the Celtics, it's more of like, okay, can they hold on to the number 1 seed in the East? And not just only in the East, in the NBA, and maintain that home court advantage, which I strongly believe is going to serve them well. I think it's huge, just being able to have home court advantage throughout the entirety of the NBA playoffs, including the NBA Finals. Should the Celtics get there, will be huge, because we have seen just how much home court has impacted this team positively, not just in years past, but especially this season with the way that they got the season started off at home.
20 straight.
Yeah, like I'll ask you this: like, come the playoffs, we know how Boston is. We know how special it is at the Garden, like watching the Celtics at home, especially when it's a big game. But especially in a year where there is so much expectation on this team, how critical is it going to be for this team to lock down the number 1 seed, not just on the East, but also get home court advantage in the NBA throughout the NBA playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's super important, especially considering the lead they have now, because something would have to go drastically wrong for them not to get it, considering they're 6 games ahead. All they have to do is go like they can go barely 500 and they'll still get the East number 1 seed. So I think it's important, especially when you consider they're 23-3 at home. They've been borderline unstoppable. But I'm going to look at it from a different lens here.
Sure.
This team really feeds off different kind of adversities they've had, right? They try to learn from them. They hear the noise and they use that as motivation. One of the biggest criticisms of the Celtics last year and Joe Mazzulla was they couldn't win at home in the playoffs.
Yep.
That's the thing that's going to kind of light a fire under them, right? They're going to be like, okay, we struggled with this last year. This is something we have to be better at. And they'll make it a point because that's how they operate. They're trying to win every game. They're trying to be as proficient as they can be. And every team is, but I think their daily mindset, and you hear Joe Mazzulla talk about it all the time, mindset. I think it comes down to that daily approach. And they don't forget, like, they're not naive. They struggled in the postseason at home last year. There's no beating around the bush. Like, some of those series went further than they should have because you struggled at home, because you couldn't close them out at home. Game 5 against the Hawks. No reason you should have lost that game, right? Games against Philly. And then you look at Miami. You lose the first 2. So I think they know they struggled at home, and that's going to be something that it's going to light a fire under them, I think.
Absolutely. And I think in a way it's going to give them that additional prove it factor, because like the way that they struggled last year at home, like at various different points of their playoff run. So I'm curious to see how they will be able to carry the regular season success at home into the postseason, and how that all plays out as well. So last question, in terms of the Celtics moving forward, as we talked about the schedule coming out of the break. I mean, they literally have an entire gauntlet of national televised games coming up in premium matchups coming up, which I cannot wait to watch. But I'm curious to see Jayson Tatum, because I think all eyes are going to be on him. Not saying that eyes won't be on the team as a whole, but I'm talking about specifically Jayson Tatum. Because if you look around the league right now, and this is no disrespect to Nikola Jokic, just no disrespect to Luka Doncic, this is no disrespect to Jalen Brunson, there's no disrespect to any other potential NBA MVP candidates that are out there. But it does seem like this is Tatum's award to potentially lose. Do you think that this in itself is one of, if not the biggest storyline surrounding the Celtics in this post All-Star break portion of the regular season?
It is. And it's funny how it kind of just took off, right? Nobody was really talking about it. Like, I think obviously Embiid being ineligible changed things, but like nobody was really talking about it. And then he had that like 7-game stretch where he was just phenomenal on both ends of the floor, playing like we've really never seen him playing, and making just an unbelievable playmaker, like things we haven't seen really from Jayson Tatum. And he's been solid all year. I think you look at it, like the numbers are naturally going to decline. And like we talked about earlier, sometimes like he's not in you got to pick your spots. Like, it's not always going to be a good thing to be unselfish. Like, he's been very unselfish, and I think it's reflected on his numbers. But like, it's funny how this kind of just took off, and it's going to be a big story going forward. Remember, right around when Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year, that campaign really took off at the All-Star break, and then the media got behind it, and look what happened. And I think being the best player on the best team has to be some sort of, it has to get you points, right? It has to get like, that has to be looked at. You are the best player on the best team, and you are the leader of that team, and the numbers back it up. I mean, there's 2 things that Tatum is missing on his resume: an MVP and a championship. And there's a good chance that he gets both this year.
Yeah. And it really would be something, because you now talk about players to have done that in the history of the Boston Celtics organization, to have won MVP and as well as championship. I mean, I'm sure the late legendary Bill Russell's name comes to mind as being part of that very short list of Celtic players to have done that. And I know for sure this would absolutely mean something for Tatum, that has certainly been very cognizant and aware of his place, and as well as the significance of Celtics history, most notably by him meeting Larry Bird for the first time.
Yeah, 100%. And I love how they finally met. It is funny that it took that long, but like,
Yeah,
I think that's just Larry's demeanor. Like, I think he's just kind of enjoying retirement, but like, as a Celtics fan, how does that not put a smile on your face?
it
Like
did. Oh
those
yeah,
are, yeah, like that is amazing. And I'm so glad that happened. And you could tell Tatum was genuinely shocked. Like he was like, it's an honor. And this is a guy that like meets a lot of people, right? Especially
yeah.
at the All-Star weekend. And the way he reacted, you could tell he was genuinely excited and genuinely happy. I'm so glad that happened.
Same here. I'm happy that it happened, but I was critical of the fact that why did it take this long? But I understand why. But I still feel the way that I do. It got
Yeah.
nothing to do with you or anybody else. But it's like, really, we waited a number of years to finally before it finally happened. But it finally happened. I'm happy that it finally happened. Hopefully, we'll see more Larry Bird around, especially for this postseason run. Should they get to the finals, hopefully, we'll see what happens. But with that being said, I want to say thank you, Justin, for hopping on the Hub of Champions podcast on Believe Network. Justin, has been a blast. Justin Turpin of WEEI. Check out his terrific Celtics coverage on WEEI.com, especially as New England and Celtics fans get ready for what will be Banner 18 come June. So, Justin, thank you so much for hopping on, man. I certainly want to have you back on, especially as we in the regular season get ready to look ahead to the playoffs as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast, and hopefully I'll be back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.